on a panel that's going to be discussing building an open climate network. And I'm really excited to have this star-studded cast here to discuss this topic that might at first seem like it's not super sexy, but we are gonna make it that today. So first, just want to introduce myself. I'm Catherine Atkin, and I work out of the Stanford Law School in the Center for Legal Informatics, and I chair the Climate Data Policy Initiative. And so makes a lot of sense that I would want to be here today on this to have this conversation, because obviously firmly believe that climate data is the foundation for climate action. And that's easy to say. And then the question is, how do you create a system that allows us to really do that in smart ways, deploy our resources? And so this is sort of the foundation for that. What are the framework standards? And most importantly, how do we work together to create that sort of nested accounting data ecosystem that's going to be required? So we have the approach to the panel today is going to be, I'm going to introduce everybody, and then we're going to have each of them talk about the innovative work that they're doing within this data ecosystem. And my hope and challenge to them is to make connections as they present about how what they're doing both creates greater clarity in their particular innovative space, but how it connects to the other speakers. So I am first going to introduce Martine Wainstein, who's the Executive Director of the Open Earth Foundation. Then we have Angel Su. She's the founder and director of the DataDriven Lab, Associate Professor of Public Policy and the Environment and Ecology program at the University of North Carolina. Louisa Durkin, who's the Climate Data Community Manager for Open Earth Foundation. Vincent Caldeira, who's the Chief Technologist for OS Climate. And then we have Nancy Norris, Senior Director, ESG and Digital Trust, Ministry of Energy, Mines, and Low Carbon Innovation for the government of British Columbia. And I've heard Nancy present, and I'm really excited to have you picking up the end of this and getting us going once we get down this list. So first, we're going to start with Martine, and you're going to talk about, sort of give us a sense of what is the challenge statement and why are we doing this work, and how can digital innovation get us where we need to go?
Thank you, Catherine. What a pleasure to join you all and those that are online, and my fellow colleagues and collaborators. It's been a long time coming for us working on this project, now almost like 4 years. So for us, it's quite historic to actually be able to today launch a digital platform, but tell you more about the story of what got us here. I'll speak to also some of the slides, and I'll talk a bit about why this is so important, what we've been working on, and how. And then we'll pass the mic along and look at it from different perspectives, because what I think is really exciting about what we bring to the table is the different angles that are relevant, particularly in the context of today and this COP, as we prepare for the process of the global stocktake next year. Next slide, please. So one of the most important whys is that because we are on this steep road towards 1.5 and net zero emissions by 2050, the global stocktake, which is the pulse and the heart of the Paris Agreement, at its core is an accounting and accountability. Microphones always do this to me. They just like go up and down. They love me. And in the digital space, we can see an analogy like we have with infrastructure. We've got cars that are our data sets, but we really need to build the highways. So the sooner we're able to think about the digital infrastructure, to put together the data, to trust the data, the easier it will be for the next 35 years to track that process towards net zero. That, for me, is one of the most important whys. And, sorry, by the way, the cheapest it will be. Putting together inventories of greenhouse gases can be extremely complicated, can be costly, and digital infrastructure and digital innovation can really reduce that and speed it up, so that we, in the future, as we see, with good digital infrastructure, we don't do global stocktakes every 5 years, we do them in real time. For that, we give the analogy of the climate internet. We need to have things that talk to each other in the similar language. The what is what we see here for us is if we think about who's involved in the Paris Agreement. Officially, this is a process between parties, countries, and the UNFCCC. But we're all part of the planet. We're all part of this net zero challenge. So what about corporates? What about subnational governments? What about cities? The way that we think we are able to integrate them into the global stocktake is to run a parallel process, an independent way of accounting their emissions so that we understand how they fit within the national efforts and the achievements of reductions of those non-state actors. And Angel will be speaking a lot more about it. I definitely learned everything I know about non-state actors through Angel. So this process of official and independent is a bit about what we've been working on from the digital infrastructure, from a community. Next slide, please. And the how, and you sort of alluded to it, we think that a way to integrate them is through nested accounting because we are all nested in our planet. It means that my impacts, I live in California, in my house, I have a footprint that is inside the city of Los Angeles, that is inside the subnational government of California, inside United States, inside planet Earth. If we're able to jurisdictionally nest our impacts, we're able to do that integration and still sort of provide value to the national inventory effort and still integrate our individual and non-party stakeholders, also called. So today we're launching the Open Climate Network, and it has two sides. What we'll talk for like the first part of the chat is the explore side, which is exploring data points. We will. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but we'll show the URL that's now live. Multiple data sets from cities, from different data providers. But then on the right, we'll talk about accounting, how to get verified data. So these are the two things that we've explored this process on the how, and I think almost like in this process we'll be jumping forth on the different topics. Maybe back to you, Catherine, and we'll introduce Angelson.
Thank you, Martine, for that overview. And Angel, your work on non-state actors and is just really inspirational and important. And I'd love to hear you talk about why is that so important? Where have we been and where do we need to go to really have it deliver on the impact as we talk about in the Innovation Hub, the role of, for instance, cities in being the drivers for real climate action?
Well, thank you so much, Catherine, and congratulations, Martine, and to everyone up here for this amazing network that we're launching today. If we could go to the next slide, it might be, yes. So Martine talked about the what, but I really want to talk about the why to give you a little bit of context for why we need this. Why do we need the Open Climate Network? Why is it so critical that we track all of these various climate efforts? I have a figure here that shows total annual greenhouse gas emissions on the y-axis and how they've increased over time. And since we started recognizing that climate change was a global issue, starting with the IPCC in 1990, then we launched the UNFCCC in 1992, 1997 we negotiated the Kyoto Protocol, it then became ratified and into force in 2005, and so on and so on and so on. But at the same time that we started collectively as the world to address climate change emissions, we see they've just continued to increase. If you could go to the next slide, please. At the same time, we see that the world is no longer strictly focusing on and looking towards national governments and nation states to tackle the problem of climate change for us. And this is just some of the data from the 2015 Paris COP all the way up to Glasgow in 2021, where we see a huge increase in the diversity of different actors and stakeholders that are present here at the Conference of Parties, also making commitments on climate change, pledging their own efforts, making their own net zero targets, Martine alluded to earlier, and also forming coalitions to address the problem of climate change. If you could go to the next slide, please. And at the same time, the number of initiatives and coalitions and networks that have also been launched have increased, with a peak in 2014 with the UN Climate Summit and then 2015 in Paris. If you could go to the next slide, please. And that's the reason why it's so critical that we start to understand and collect data on what this activity of non-state actors, these initiatives, these different networks, what they're actually doing on climate change. If you could go to the next slide. Particularly in the lead up to the Paris Agreement, we saw that there were hundreds of cities. This is Paris Mayor Anne Hidalgo and former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg. Next slide, please. And they joined with hundreds of other governors and mayors in the Paris negotiations to make their own actions and pledges on climate change. Next slide, please. And the agreement of the Paris actually officially recognized for the first time the contributions of various actors, including private corporations and businesses, and all levels of government, from towns and municipalities all the way up to states like California, which has the 5th largest economy, to helping achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. So when we talk about the global stocktake, it's not just about parties. It actually does involve all of these various actors and all levels of government to make it happen. It's all hands on deck effort. And unfortunately, we don't have all of these actors yet contributing data, reporting on what they're doing on climate change, emissions inventories, for us to be able to track progress. So they say that they're committing to 50% emissions reductions by 2030, but are they actually meeting those targets? So that's why it's incredibly critical that we have this conversation here today to talk about this collective effort to measure, take stock of what different actors are doing. So that's a little bit of the why. Why are we here? Why is it critical?
I think great. Thank you so much, Angel. I'm now going to pass it to Louisa, and you're going to talk about, I know that you work with Open Earth, you're the community climate data community manager, and I'd like to have you tell the audience how you're building a community. What is the role of stakeholder collaboration in advancing this very audacious but important agenda?
Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, it was nice to hear about the what and the why, and now a little bit about the how. We do this through a collaborative effort. If you could go to the next slide, please. And what that looks like is we have our Climate Action Data 2.0 community. We have the global stocktake platform that we're launching today, and also the overall initiative of how do we really digitize the independent global stocktake and bring all these non-state actors to the table in order to do that in a way that is interoperable. Next slide. First, I'll tell you a little bit about our Climate Action Data 2.0 community. We actually launched last year in a declaration at COP26. There's over 60 data providers and technical experts as part of the community, really working to collaborate and bridge legacy accounting with innovative and emerging technologies such as machine learning, AI, blockchain verification, all of these different things. And we've really landed on this nested accounting as one of our first big initiatives to work on together. So some of the actors that we have in our group that meets monthly are WRI, Climate Trace, OS Climate, Climate Policy Radar, shout out, GCOM, ICLE, CDP, UNFCCC, etc. So it's open. Our focus is really open source. How do we build these digital commons, these digital public goods in open source for people to be able to use and produce findings and reports and information that can be utilized by the community that's trying to digitize this independent stock-taking initiative. Okay, next slide, please. You can see there's a pretty broad vision for what digitizing the independent global stocktake looks like. But what I have circled here is our nested accounting, because that is a really key part of getting a better understanding of all of the actors in a more grassroots way up to the country level, so we can better understand our collective progress. Next slide, please. So what's under the hood? All the way on the left here, you can see our data model, a collaborative effort through the Climate Action Data 2.0 community, through the work of DDL and Climactor, and through the Open Earth team, we've been able to put together a data model that's very flexible that anybody can import their data into. And this model allows comparability between different data sets. It's also open source, and it's also been workshopped with our Climate Action Data 2.0 community. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what are we actually launching today. This is very exciting. So this is the first preview of the Open Climate Network. The idea here is we're going to talk about the nested accounting platform, and when I hand it off to Nancy, we'll talk more about the verification aspects of this. But in the I have some more images. If you could go to the next slide. Here is what it looks like when you log on to openclimate.network. You can see that all the way on the right we have just Earth and our emissions for Earth and what is happening there. If you go to the next slide, you can see what's happening in a single country. And we have multiple data sources that you can choose from in order to understand that. And then if you go to the next slide, here we have uploaded the PRIMAP and UNFCCC data sources in order to verify the data for Canada, for example. And if you go to the next slide, we have some sub-national actors in there, the provinces and states. And that information is coming from different sources because we know those sources that I just showed are national information. And so we're trying to nest many different data sources using the same flexible data model. And if you head over to the next slide, you can see, for example, we're using a CDP data in this case in order to understand the emissions for British Columbia. And to the next one. Finally, you can see that if I type in a city all the way over here, one more slide. Yes, great. So we don't have the information for Vancouver, and this is when we get to our calls to action. This website is for everybody to use and for everybody to input into. It's open source and available, and you can see we have our collaborate button down at the bottom here. And the idea is that we want people to help input data sources that are reliable into this system and really build an open source network of people collaborating through community to build a really valuable nested accounting platform so we can get to the climate action that we're looking for. Thank you. Pass it back to Catherine.
Thank you, Louisa. Well, that is really exciting. I didn't know we were getting a digital launch today, so thank you for that. And thank you for all the work that you've done between the DataDriven EnviroLab and OEF to really not only deepen our understanding, but bring more of us into this and empower us to be actors as well. So thank you for that. Okay, so I have Vincent Caldeira, who's the Chief Technologist for OS Climate, and he's going to talk about, surprise, data collaboration, and we're excited to hear about your work as well.
Sure, I think you can just move to the next slide. So I represent OS Climate, just to give you a bit of an idea of why OS Climate was born. We are also an open source project under the Linux Foundation, and our focus initially was to deal with the problem of climate data for the climate finance community with a focus on, in particular, climate risk assessment. So as most of you should know, one big dependency for climate transition is getting the financial sector coming to the table and financing not only the implementation of new technology that support transition, but also whatever is needed to face the effect. An example is if you're actually helping out a provider to phase out a coal factory, what happens to the people in the microeconomic part of the world that are suddenly losing their job? You have to also find funding to train these people, to enable the rollout of sustainable technology. So there is a whole, I would say, social role that the financial community is taking to understand how to fund a sustainable transition in time. Unfortunately, financials have been very good at modeling financial risk. They are very bad at modeling climate risk because they don't understand it. So from West Climate perspective, what we realize is there is an opportunity to provide a set of tooling and data management capability to all the institutions in the world. And if we do this, we are going to be able to fasten the understanding of these institutions in terms of making climate assessment and facilitating the transition. So West Climate was born for this role. And then what we realized very quickly is a lot of the, I would say, the issues that our members are facing is actually in acquiring and processing data. So we brought a number of technology companies to the table. I'm part of one of them. I work for Red Hat, which belongs to IBM. But we basically have Amazon, Microsoft, and Google as members of OS Climate. So they're all partnering as the top 4 technology companies in the world, providing the tooling and the platform and the capability that most NGO or institution may not be able to quickly find because technology people are hard to get by, right? So that's to give you an idea of what OS Climate is set. Next slide. We have a relatively interesting approach to solve the data problem. Most data providers, they try to create the central repository of good data. Historically, it has never worked. Our approach is very different. We actually have a data federation approach. So what we do is we actually link existing data sources from NGO, from commercial data provider, but we do it using open source code and tooling. So it's basically transparent and it's repeatable. So the idea is when we have collaborators like Martin and Luisa and their community who need to build solution, they get the technology blueprint for the platform, so they don't have to reinvent the wheel. And then they are able to focus on building their tool, which is what is actually bringing the value. So like, you don't really want to understand my daily world, right? It's a world of geek, like dealing with Python code and automating platform implementation. All of you in the room probably never want to touch this. So that's what we're trying to do here. Yeah? So next slide. So in this case, right, what's our collaboration for? In what you have seen today, we are basically supporting the back end of all this, the data management. And there's basically 2 benefits in our approach. The first benefit is when you are building data-dependent tool, you don't need to move the data around. You can leave it where it is, and you can query it. If anybody wants to improve the way you access the data, they just need to look at your open source code and do it better and contribute the better solution. So it really helps collaborative effort to access and use data in a more efficient manner. The other part, which is very critical as well, is about transparency and trust. And that is something I think everyone in the room who deals maybe with academic research will understand this. If I publish an academic paper with a very interesting finding, the first question you are going to ask me is, what is the data you have to back it up? And how can I actually reproduce your finding? If I'm not able to reproduce, should I actually trust your publication? So the way that this platform works is that it creates an automated data lineage which allows you to understand how data was accessed, how data was transformed, and how data was used in the course of modeling climate scenario or in the course of being integrated with tooling. The moment you can look at how people use the data, you get a much better transparency and trust. So this is really what it's all about.
Thank you, Vincent. And so we've had a chance to hear about non-state actors, the corporate sector, and now we're going to start taking a look at how you actually do this accounting and reporting. And so, Martin, you're going to give us some insights and overview.
Thank you, Catherine. So in many ways, what we presented now is the importance of data aggregation, the infrastructure, the why communities of collaboration are so important. There isn't one single data provider. And Vincent talked a lot about, in many ways, the role of decentralization, how all of these actors form their own center, but they federate together. Now, one of the things that's so important about putting all this data together is not just so that we just have better insight, is that we can actually take action with it. Now, to take action on data, we also need to trust it. We need to know that it's true, right? If we submit our information of our revenues and our costs when we submit our taxes, but the government doesn't trust the data, how are we going to properly pay our taxes? How are they going to get back our check or actually have to pay more? And in the climate space, it's very similar. We need to be able to have a mechanism for trusting the data, for verifying it. And so the Open Climate Network has two parts of it. One is bringing all these data providers, nesting that information, but also providing mechanisms and infrastructure so this happens. Next slide. And we've talked about decentralization, the top left. This is why we talk about digital infrastructure and those highways that need to be built. It's digital public goods that we're talking about here, the role of nested accounting. But then on the bottom, there's two important things. Everything is a claim. I claim that I've emitted X amount if I'm a corporation, or I claim that I've reduced X amount. So we got to verify that claim and create digital trust. And the second part is one of the wicked problems in our climate space and in the heart of the Paris Agreement. One of the key important articles and tenets of the Paris Agreement is transparency. But if you run a corporation, one of the key things the important thing about corporate law is your privacy, your corporate veil, and the need to retain certain business competitiveness. So how do we have privacy and transparency? Well, over the last 5 to around 10 years, there's been a lot of progress in cryptography. And this goes back into some of the things that Vincent said. How do you make things run in the background that you can trust, but without really understanding all the processes? Cryptography allows certain queries to be done where I need to trust the information you're going to give me, but I don't need to have all your raw data set. So when we want to bring in data from corporations and cities, we need to be able to create a mechanism for that. And I know that Nancy was going to show you a little bit of what that mechanism looks in action, but it's very important if we think about from the view of a corporation, one single data asset, like my verified scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions and my verified mitigations, who needs to query that information? My investors, who have a leverage on me as a corporation and really want me to reduce my emissions. So that's where ESG trust is very important. My government, whoever actually gives me the license to operate and is also wanting me to reduce my emissions and also helping me in the process, because if I reduce my emissions as a corporation, I help my subnational government reduce its emissions and its pledges, and therefore my nation actor. And also my customers, right? So one single data asset could be transparently queried, searched, but also allowing me to maintain my privacy. So that requires a certain deals of open source digital infrastructure to do that. And this is one of the things that we've equipped the platform to do it, and nothing better to do that than partnering with government, because the better government technology and digital public goods works, the more other jurisdictions can replicate the same logic. Those are some of the key things that I wanted to say. Of course, we're talking about accounting. You said, like, I hope we're going to turn this a little bit more sexy than like accounting that tends to be pretty dry. But robust accounting also deals with robust finance, right? If we put trillions of dollars into the economy, which we have to do, but we are doing it blind because we don't know exactly where it's going and how it's moving the needle, we're going to fail, and we have very little margins of error. So what we're doing, one of the reasons why we're putting so much effort on this, is to be able to do that, to make sure that finance and accounting are working together for that short, tight timeline that we have to net zero that Angel alluded to. Back to you, Catherine, and excited to see in Nancy's points.
Yes. Thank you, Martin, for that setup. And Nancy, I'm going to say your title again for the people who've joined. You're the Senior Director for ESG and Digital Trust. I love this. For the Ministry of Energy, Mines, and Low Carbon Innovation. Everybody needs to have low carbon innovation in their title now. That's a next to do for everybody. Government at the Government of British Columbia. So Nancy, talk to us about how you've taken Martin's charge and challenge as a government, which is easier said than done, and used DLT to advance this effort for yourselves, but obviously for the rest of the world.
Hi, everyone. You know that I work for government because my title is very long and very confusing. So I work for the government of British Columbia in Canada. It's the westernmost province in British Columbia. And we, in my province, we have very strong climate legislation, which large emitters have to report their emissions annually to the government. At the same time, we also have been investing in distributed ledger technology. We have multiple teams that are working on digital identity for individuals and for organizations. And we're building this technology in open source, contributing it to the open source community. So the project that I'll be talking about today is called the Energy and Mines Digital Trust. And I'll explain a little bit about the project and then how it links back into the Open Climate Network. You can head to the next slide. So this project is using digital credentials. These are verified credentials, as Martin was saying, around that the technology around cryptography is very advanced over the past few years. This allows the relationship of trust that happens in the non-digital world to be actually replicated in the digital world. So if you think about your driver's license, say, it's issued to you by an authority. You are the holder of that driver's license. And then when you show it to somebody to prove your age, to prove where you live, that person can look at that license and there's certain indicators on it that show that it has been issued properly, that it comes from a certain authority, from your government. So this can be replicated now in the digital world. And so the technology we're using is called verified digital credentials. As Martin was saying, they allow for much more efficient reporting. In the use case that we're piloting, it's around GHG reporting. So for companies in British Columbia, large emitters like mines and energy producers, they have to report their emissions on an annual basis to the government. If we can replicate that process, which right now is PDFs attached to emails and web forms that they have to fill out, if we can replicate it using digital credentials, the mines and natural gas companies hold that information as a credential, a digital credential, and then they can share that pieces of that information with various data consumers who are, for whom it is interesting. So they can use that information for regulatory reporting to the government. They can also send information, that GHG information, to potential purchasers, to potential investors for ESG reporting purposes, and, as it ties into this presentation, to voluntary carbon accounting platforms such as the Open Climate Network. So that's the efficiency. Accuracy, trust, privacy preserving, these are all aspects of that the technology allows for. Because we're talking about a distributed ledger, information about the credential itself is captured in the ledger. Who issued it, when it was issued, and that it is still valid. But the information that's actually contained in the credential is private, and it's sealed cryptographically. And so once that digital credential is sent to the holder, they are in control of their own data. At the same time, the information about that credential is stored in the ledger. So for carbon accounting, for GHG reporting, it has this dual effect of being very transparent, but also privacy preserving for the organization. Maximize markets and innovative technologies. So for the use case that we're working on for natural gas, there are now digital markets that are occurring. One that we work with is called Expansive, where it's a digital market for the environmental attributes of responsibly produced gas. So this technology, we as a government, it's enabling us to pass information and map regulatory processes in a more efficient way. It's also opening up markets for operators within our jurisdiction. Next slide, please. So this is in the digital credential world. It's called the trust triangle. It's not a terribly intuitive graphic, but really what it's trying to say is it's trying to replicate and explain the way trust works in the non-digital world. So as I was saying about driver's licenses, they're issued to you by your government. The government is the issuer. The holder is you. You have a digital wallet, or in the non-digital world, you have a physical wallet that holds the credential. And then the verifier in this system is the person who is looking at your driver's license and looking at all of the symbols and logos and whatnot on it and saying, yeah, that is a government of BC issued driver's license. I can tell. Or say if it's currency, if you shine a certain light on it, this Sorry about that. There's certain indicators that show that it was in fact issued by the issuer. So that dotted line there is the trust that happens between the issuer and the verifier of the credential. And this is replicable now using cryptography for digital credentials. So it's enabling this digitization of individual identity, organizational identity. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, again, another fairly complicated slide, but I'll try and explain it. So this is the ecosystem we're trying to build with the digital trust. On the left-hand side, these are the credentials, the digital credentials that we are piloting and creating. So you can see at the top the greenhouse gas emissions verification report. This is an actual report that is legislated, and all of the governance for it is laid out in the non-digital world for large emitters in British Columbia. They have to every year submit this information to the government. So we're creating a digital credential version of that. And then you'll see in the second column, these are all of the issuers of credentials. So in the case of the GHG greenhouse gas reporting, we have PwC. They are an auditor. And in BC, they are a certified auditor of carbon emissions and this kind of the GHG verification report. So we've set them up with a digital wallet. They issue this greenhouse gas report as a digital credential. Then that is sent to, you can see at the top, in the center of this slide, there's Copper Mountain and Teck are mining operators in BC. Tourmaline and Pacific Cambrium are natural gas producers in BC. So they're the holders of the credential. They have their own digital wallets. The credential is issued to them, and then they can hold it within their wallet. And then they can share that information with any other entity that wants to consume it and is set up to operate in this network. So you can see at the top, that at the top, one of our verifiers or consumers of that data is the Open Earth, the Open Climate Network. You can go to the next slide. So I have a video that I can show. I don't know how we're doing for time. Yeah? Okay. Let's show the video. Oh, Martine, I think this is the video that you're supposed to narrate.
Oh, this is showing live the credentialing process. What does it look like on the ground? There's an Explorer, and then there's also an account page. This is the wallet where you have your credentials, so it's like your driver's license, but in this case, it's a company. This has a credential about their Scope 1 emissions, and it's what the government requires them to operate within that jurisdiction. They completed the steps. They're now logging in. The corporation's now in the network, and they have right now no information about their emissions, so they're going to start loading those credentials, Scope 1, 2, mitigations, emissions, mitigations, and net zero. So this is a macro view of how to deal with net zero, but in a way that's verified and dealing with the relationship between the business wallet and the government wallet. So as they're doing that, this is just showing like how this operates in the background. They are connecting into the network. These are active corporations, a demo of an active corporation operating in the government space, and it's going to upload these verified, proofed, and audited credential. Particularly in this case, we worked with PwC that verified the information. So this is what that credential looks like, and it has a digital fingerprint. It gets approved. It assigns it to a site. This is specifically a mine site. Think about this across all sites around the world owned by corporations. That's the verified credential of that Scope 1 emissions. It adds up to the total. And now we're going to add a Scope 2 emissions, which relates to electricity. But in this case, we're going to show how the company is going to self-report data, which is the majority of how data is being reported, through self-attesting to it. So when it's submitted, it shows that it has not been verified. So there hasn't been an auditor, it hasn't been a process. It's kind of like submitting your taxes without a certified public accountant in some sense. That's what the credential looks like when it's verified, and now it can account in a nested way, and this is what it looks like when it's not verified, so it doesn't have a digital signature of the source of trust. And if you think about this at a macro level, this equips governments, let's go back to the slide deck, equips governments with the ability to roll out regulation that's smart, right? If I have to create corporate disclosure and request things about your company, I need to be able to have this digital exchange with you constantly. And this needs to be seamless, it needs to be frictionless. I need to trust it needs to be automatic. This is a little bit of what this shows. Next slide. So that was a little bit of what this pilot is. It's been now almost a year working together, a year and a half. A lot of what powers that is open source, so it's freely available. A lot of what we've noticed, and Nancy often shares some of these stories, is the government put out a lot of this infrastructure out there, and we've seen like UN and other groups around the world using it and replicating it in their own case studies. So we see in the next couple of years we're going to be loading a lot more of data providers, a lot more of data issuers. Any carbon footprint software that you know of would be an issuer in this digital trust network, and a lot of that allows us to then duplicate this information or duplicate this infrastructure and work with, for example, Global South countries that definitely don't have the capability to put something this sophisticated, but to be able to roll out within their jurisdiction and then just use it. Obviously, it requires a lot of capacity building. This is something we're very aware of, and we're working with a lot of groups to do that. But that's sort of what we need. So that sort of in summary, I don't know what's it. Have time, I think a Q&A and even a chat and would be great.
Thanks, Martin. Yes, I actually have a question that I'd love, a couple of them that I'd love to just serve up and see who'd like to talk more about it, because as we've seen and the audience knows, there's a lot of amazing innovation going on, and we're still working to get out of silos. And a lot of you are talking about how we both innovate more deeply, but also create connections. So I'd love to have each of you maybe think about, I think about it as a lawyer so what's the enabling environment for us to scale these approaches? And we know we're going to need changes at the global level, at the country level, at the local level. If you could have all the decision makers in this room or wave your magic wand, what would you say are the critical do difference right now? What would you want to be put in place that would allow this work to accelerate and deepen at the pace required to make the changes we need? As you said, Martin, this is not just about reporting for reporting's sake, it's to unlock climate action. So if each of you could, you can pick the level at which you want to have your wish list, but what would you have happen most quickly?
I love this close to Christmas that you ask us this question. First, probably I would reduce the volume around the room if it's like anything I can wish for. No, I think one of the key things is that we need to figure out how to build more awareness around the importance around that digital infrastructure. We're very used to that in the public sector, on public goods. So we need to be able to have a lot more awareness of why it's important. How do we figure out how to fund a lot of that infrastructure, how to put it into practice, how to roll it out, because of what I said at the very beginning. The sooner we get a lot of this infrastructure right, the easier, the better we'll be able to have a chance of actually meeting our targets in such a short time frame where we're all together, right? Where everyone pulls and pulls towards the same direction, which is why for us, it's so important that when you land on the platform, the first thing you see is the data about Earth. because that is one data that we all share. That is the one record that we're all part of. So if we're able to start there, we can see how we fit in that macro puzzle. And it is this thing that I think, just like highways connects us in cities, this is sort of like the vision that we have.
One data to rule them all, right? You stole my answer. I was going to say awareness, because I think that that's really the key, and I think that's why we're all here. And I think one of the challenges with technology, and I think the fatigue that decision makers and companies and individuals, governments all face, is that it's like, oh no, not another platform, not another technology that we have to learn, that we have to adopt. And I think what's really appealing about the OS climate solution and the idea of a federated data commons is that you don't have to do that. You really don't. And so I thought, Vincent, what you were saying was incredibly compelling, because that's the idea. I think if people just understand that now we have tools that can seamlessly integrate and have data sets speak to each other, then that lowers the barrier for entry. And so, yeah, I think it's awareness, in that we don't have to be building new technology platforms all the time. Actually, we don't want people to do that. It really should be this decentralized rather than yet another centralized platform that locks us into a path-dependent process that then becomes difficult and expensive to break out of.
Good one, Angel. Yeah, I think enablement is awareness, right? But I think while we're kind of at this COP thinking a lot about accountability, thinking a lot about the global stocktake mechanism, tools like this in the next year can really mature to provide those mechanisms. And then hopefully we can see them expand toward other mechanisms as well. So if we're doing a really good job federating data commons and nesting accounting and all of this for mitigation for the global stocktake, we can do the same thing for adaptation. We can do the same thing for ecological stocktaking, for other sustainability initiatives like for biodiversity. We can also do it for statutory reporting. So I think kind of thinking big in how we develop platforms, so we're not developing hundreds of different platforms, and how we can enable that to grow like mycelium into other ways of thinking about things. So.
All right, so I mean, on my side, I think there are really two important factors, right? The first one is we really stand for open source and open collaboration. And what we have seen is, especially whenever I attend something like the COP27, I see a tremendous gathering of people into one place, but also many of these smart people are pretty much doing the same thing. How much faster could we actually go if we were sitting all these people in the same room, or it's a virtual room or not, and actually work together to build the joint solution? So that's the first thing. Two, on data specifically, we have to look a bit ahead of time. Sure, right now we are really looking at gathering the data we have and getting a better sense of observability. Now, if you look forward, the main question is going to be, when we take active decision to green the atmosphere, how do we actually verify that these decisions are the right one? So from my technologist point of view, we've kind of started to look a bit ahead of time from a platform perspective, because we started to think that what's going to happen next? People will have to set KPI whenever they decide to finance transition, and then they are going to start for a mechanism to monitor that those KPI are met. And so that brings us to a totally different problem now, that you basically have to link government, non-government organization, different industry, and literally integrate the supply chain from this industry into those set of tools and those decision tooling. So I have the chance to work with a lot of these industry, automotives, oil and gas. So the kind of next problem that I'm trying to look at now is, how do we help you guys get all this data, this observation data from your assets, from your factory, from your production, and link this together to our climate action?
Yeah, I would build on, so education, awareness, collaboration. I would say that dedicated funding and awareness and attention on interoperability between various systems is key, because there isn't always sort of a business incentive for all of the different actors creating these various systems to make sure that the systems are interoperable. The open source community has a fantastic ethos around this. You know, everyone collaborating together to create a solution that is accessible to all. But I think that public-private, collaboration and dedicated funding and focus on interoperability is really important, because it's kind of a gap at the moment, and it's a really important key to making all of these systems talk to each other and work together for the common goal.
Thank you, and close us out, Martin.
I just wanted to anchor a little bit of like why we're doing this here. We are at the UNFCCC Global Innovation Hub, which has both the physical pavilion and the virtual hub. 2 days ago, we launched the virtual hub. As Open Earth, we're honored to be part of the Global Innovation Hub. And the project is about connecting cities and their core human needs with solution suppliers and financing for actions on the ground. What we showed today is also designed to integrate with that platform, which is also designed as an infrastructure, one of the first of its kind from the UN to launch an infrastructure that magnitude and sophistication, so that those projects that are deployed in cities, they're helping meet core human needs and climate goals, can roll up to inventory. So I just wanted to mention that because if you to learn more about the Global Innovation Hub, you'll learn a lot about that platform. A lot of what we showed here is also designed to integrate with. I just want to particularly thank a lot of the people that have been part of this journey, because around 4 years ago, we started working with Angel around this. 3 years ago, we launched the Open Climate Collabathon. It sort of like resonates with what Vincent was saying. What if everyone's in the same room? Well, we actually try to do that. We brought universities around the world to join in a Discord channel, join in Zooms, and started collaborating on different pieces of the same puzzle. I really think this is the type of thing where it's not just open source, but it's like new ways of getting people together to understand how we are all stakeholders of that infrastructure. So I really want to thank for everyone that's been part of this over the years, and looking forward to everyone that's been part of the community and working from here on out, including you, Catherine, where you've been so active in our community, because you bring such an important perspective on climate data policy and anchoring this into that context. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Martine, and thanks for your leadership. I want to thank all the panelists for a really rich conversation, and I think it was pretty exciting. Maybe not sexy, but pretty exciting. So a round of applause for our speakers.